Okay, today going to take a look at the Deluge's envelopes. So we've got two of them. Both of them are ADSR. So we've got attack, decay, sustain, release. Envelope 1 is normaled to the amp by default. There's no disconnecting that as far as I know, so you can't create a drone that way, but there's other ways to do drones using the sequencer, which we'll get into later. But the envelopes can be tied to most, though not all, parameters in order to create a curve for how that particular parameter gets applied. So the sort of standard example is, so envelope 1 is pointing at the amp. So if I want to change the attack in order to have a more gradual onset, then I turn up the attack. Which, by the way, envelope 1's attack and release stages are tied to this sort of quick function knob up here. So then for the release, if we turn that back down, so the release determines how long it'll carry on for even after we're done holding down the key or the pad. And then decay and sustain. So the sustain sets a level that it will hold at. Let's turn that down more. So it starts off high and then goes down. And the decay determines how quickly that happens. So attack is how long is the initial onset. Decay is how long it takes to go down to the sustain level. Sustain is just a level that it holds at as long as you're holding the pad or the key. And then release is how long it takes to go to nothing after you let go of the key or the pad. But if we don't have to just have it be tied to the amp, so we can't, like I said, you can't disconnect the envelope 1 from the amp, but you can apply it to other things like the cutoff frequency or resonance. So to do that, to tie it to anything else, we just have to access the particular parameter, either using the shortcut on the pads or going in through the menu. Once you have it open, you can just hold shift and then select whatever mod source you want. So in our case, so all the mod sources are over here. In our case, we're working with the envelopes. We've got envelope 1, envelope 2. If I wanted to have envelope 1 also affect the cutoff frequency, then with the frequency open, I do shift and select envelope 1. So now I've got sort of the intensity of that connection. So how much is envelope 1 going to affect the frequency? Let's turn this down a little bit. So now not only are the levels going down to the sustain level, but the cutoff is going down as well, as though I were turning the knob. And we do the same thing with resonance and a lot of other stuff. There are some things like effects, which we're not going to get into now, but the effects cannot be tied to the envelopes. They can be tied to like sidechain and LFO, but which again we'll get into in another video, but not everything can be tied to the envelopes. But the envelopes themselves are also potential mod sources. So let's say I wanted, for example, the attack of envelope 1 to change over time. So I could actually tie that to, let's say, LFO2. And we'll turn that way up. And then I want to slow LFO2 down. We'll get into LFOs in probably the next video, but So as the LFO is going, the attack stage is increasing and decreasing. So some of the notes are slow onset, and then it shifts back into a quicker, sharper onset. So it just creates some variance there, and you can do that with any of the stages of the envelope. Now you can take that to even another level by looking at, let's look at vibrato, which is really just the LFO1 pointing at master pitch. So let's say we turn that on, right? So we have this waviness happening with the pitch now, but even that can be, so while the LFO is a mod source, this connection, this intensity, can also be a mod destination. So I can tie this LFO1's intensity on, or the intensity of the effect on LFO1 on the master pitch. Maybe I want to tie that to, let's say, envelope 2. So that it's not a constant thing. So it can become more or less intense over time. And I believe that can be done with most modulation connections. Now, some of the limitations I already mentioned, effects cannot be modulated by the envelopes. Distortions, the different distortion options also cannot, except for the wavefold option. That one can be tied to the envelope. And if for any parameter, if you want to know what it can use as a mod source, once you're in the parameter, if you just click the select knob, it'll show you all the different modulation options. So so we can pick the particular thing here too. And then once things start getting complicated and a patch starts to have lots of different connections, if you want to see what all those connections are in the menu, we just go down to the mod matrix, and then this is a list of all the connections that are there. So the only one that won't be listed here is the link between envelope 1 and the amp, because that can't be edited as far as I know. But a lot of these are default, right? So just init patch, velocity is tied to level. So it's labeled pressure here, but that's aftertouch, is tied to level. MPEY is tied to the low pass filter frequency, and so on, right? But then we also have these different connections that we've made here too, right? So we added some vibrato, so we can see LFO is connected to the pitch. We can see envelope 2 is connected to that connection. And then if you want to get rid of these, or get rid of any of them, you just select it and then turn it down to 0, and then it won't be listed in the matrix anymore. That connection will go away if it's set to 0. So the mod matrix is pretty powerful on this, being able to connect not just sort of standard sources to standard destinations, but also being able to connect sources to the connections between other modulation sources. So it gets pretty complicated and pretty powerful. There's one other thing I wanted to go through related to envelopes. So, and specifically here, I'm going to set this back to an init patch real quick. So the polyphony settings mainly impact not just how many voices can be present for this particular patch, but also how the envelopes behave. So by default, an init patch will be set to polyphonic, which just means you can play multiple notes at once. But each time you press a key, it's going to re-trigger. So each note gets its own envelope, going through all 4 stages. But let's take a look at, let's give us a really long attack, just so this is sort of highlighted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, 121, So each time I play a note, each note is starting at the beginning of that attack phase. So it gets that full long onset. But if I switch to monophonic, so long as I'm connecting them, so if I'm playing legato, each note re-triggers the envelope from the end of the attack phase. So actually, let's pull sustain way down too, just so it's, and make decay kind of long. Let's bring that down more. All right, decay might be too long. So it goes up and then it comes back down. But if we switch, so being in monophonic, so it starts to come back down, and then when I play another note, it's starting at the end of that attack phase, so it's starting at maximum. So it skips the attack phase, goes right to the max level, and then goes through the remaining 3 stages of the envelope. Legato, on the other hand, legato doesn't re-trigger the envelope at all, and just continues at wherever it currently is, right? So if you're halfway through that long decay phase, it's not going to suddenly be back at maximum after the attack phase. So the tricky part is, what if you want you want to create a monophonic patch, but you want it to, even if you're playing legato, you want it to re-trigger the attack phase every single time, rather than jumping straight to maximum levels. And the answer for that is really just set it to polyphonic and put your max voices down to 1, right? So then you've effectively created a monosynth. You're just forcing it to trigger the entire envelope from beginning to end every time you play a note, regardless of how you're connecting them with the pads. So there's lots more of modulation stuff, but I think we'll leave it there for envelopes. It'll start tying in more to LFOs and our other mod sources as well, just because of how complex the mod matrix can be. But I think we'll leave it there for now. So, till next time.